Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fifth session in our series on kind of issues that we face. I want to thank you all for joining me here today. As always, if you do have comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section here on Facebook or on my YouTube page where this will be posted later. For those of you that are following along in your Bibles at home, we will be going through the story of the prophet Samuel rebuking King Saul. So we're in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 1 through 15. As a little bit of background information, Saul has just been installed as Israel's first king. After leading the people to victory over the Ammonites, Saul now faces another enemy, the Philistines. Although Samuel had distinctly told Saul to wait 7 days for him to come and offer sacrifices before Israel went to battle, Saul gets impatient and proceeds to offer the sacrifices himself. So this is sort of a background information of where we are in the story. As always, we do have a couple icebreaker questions before we get to the story itself to kind of warm us up, get our minds going. First question is, growing up, with what authority figure did you have the most run-ins? Well, in elementary school, my teachers. The way I remember being in elementary school was I was the kid that my parents were probably secretly handing bottles of wine to the teachers saying, "I'm sorry for my child, please accept this as reparations for their insanity." I was not a very good child. I was not. I remember being very rude towards my fellow students, tearing them down, making fun of them. I was, on a certain level, a bully. And so definitely I had run-ins with the teachers. I had my teachers calling home and talking about what I did, what I didn't do, how I was misbehaving in class. I was not the best child. But once I got to middle school, that all sort of mellowed out. I can't really recall having run-ins with any other authority figures after that. I definitely really mellowed out starting in middle school, but the ones that come to mind are particularly my 3rd and 4th grade teachers. I think those were my worst years. But what about you all? Growing up, with what authority figure did you have the most run-ins? Let me know in the comments below. Our second icebreaker question: are you generally early, on time, or late for meetings? I am generally early, like father, like son. My parents raised my brothers and I going to various orchestra concerts, plays, things like that, and my dad always liked getting to the Detroit Symphony Orchestra concert for the concert talk, about a half hour early, so that he could listen to all of the background information on the pieces that were going to be played. Basically learn more about the music before he heard the music. And so that's kind of an inside joke now, that wherever we go, we have to get there for the concert talk. But definitely I always aim to be to a meeting early, because even if I run into a little bit of a snag, then there's still some wiggle room. I can still be on time. And it is a very rare occasion where I am late for much of anything, let alone meetings and other important events. So I'm generally early. About 95% or better of the time I am early. What about you all? Are you generally early, on time, or late for meetings and other events? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, we will get to the reading. Again, we are in 1 Samuel, chapter 13, verses 1 through 15. Listen now for the word of our Lord. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. Saul chose 3,000 men from Israel. 2,000 were with him at Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah in Benjamin. The rest of the men he sent back to their homes. Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Geba, and the Philistines heard about it. Then Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land and he said, "Let the Hebrews hear." So all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel has become a stench to the Philistines. And the people were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand at the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth Aven. When the men of Israel saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard-pressed, they hid in caves and thickets, among the rocks and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained in Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. "What have you done?" asked Samuel. Saul replied, "When I saw that the men were scattering and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." "You acted foolishly," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him leader of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." Then Samuel left Gilgal and went up to Gibeah in Benjamin, and Saul counted the men who were with him. They numbered about 600. This is the word of our Lord. Thanks be to God. Our first question: what does Saul's rationale for offering sacrifices sound like to you? A good reason, a valid excuse, a poor excuse, a rationalization, a snub of Samuel's authority? To me, it sounds like a rationalization. If Saul had been given a command by God, and he's growing impatient, he's trying to rationalize his impatience. He's trying to essentially justify his unjust acts. So, to me, it sounds like a rationalization. He's trying to make excuses. It might sound like a valid excuse. It might sound like a good reason, but it is an excuse, nonetheless. It is an attempt at rationalizing his impatience and his hastiness in action. So, definitely with that, it is a snub of Samuel's authority. It is a demeaning of Samuel's authority in that, well, okay, if Samuel can do it, I can do it too. That's not the case. So, that's my response. Let me know what you all think in the comments below. I'd love to hear your responses. Question 2. Who do you hold most responsible for Saul getting into trouble? The Philistines for oppressing God's people, the Israelites for deserting Saul, Samuel himself for going ahead, or Samuel for cutting it so close. I say Saul. He was not advised by the Philistines, the Israelites, by Samuel to go ahead. What he did was a conscious decision. So, he made that decision of his own conscience. He made that decision himself. Whether or not he got advisement to do so, we are not told. But from what we are told, we can assume that this was his conscious decision. Okay, sure, Samuel may have been partly responsible with arriving late. Maybe the Israelites deserting Saul sort of provoked Saul to be hasty. But in the end, it was Saul's decision. That is, we can't try to justify hastiness of action, mistakes, with trying to cast the blame elsewhere. So, that's my response. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. Number 3, how do you feel about Saul's punishment? It seems harsh. He got what he deserved. It shows following the Lord is serious business, or something else. It definitely shows that following the Lord is serious business. If God tells you to jump, you definitely need to be asking how high, without question. On the whole, it does sound a little bit harsh that he makes one mistake and all of a sudden God has turned his back on him. God is looking elsewhere for this king that, bear in mind, he didn't want to give Israel to begin with. God wanted to be essentially the sole ruler of the people. You have the 12 tribes of Israel. They did fine in the wilderness with the Lord providing for them, but the people wanted a king. They prayed for a king. They raised this concern to God, saying, give us a king. All right. So, on a certain level, okay, maybe he did get what he deserved. He deserved punishment. He was punished, but that punishment does seem a little harsh, that it's like one strike and you're out. You're done. But that's my opinion, though. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. Number 4, when it comes to waiting, how would you rate yourself on a scale of 1, very impatient, to 10, very patient? This just makes me think of an item game in the Mario Party games for N64 that Katie and I play often enough. One of the characters in there, when you land on an item space, they'll sometimes ask you the question, can you be patient for the things you want? And you say yes or no. And I think Katie and I definitely say no every time. We are not the most patient of people. By no means are we a 1, but by no means are we a 10 either. I would say that me personally, I'm probably a 5. I'm right down the middle. I can definitely be impatient at first, but after a while that impatience does kind of run its course. I get used to kind of waiting for it. I get used to not having it come in the immediate, and it just kind of becomes, in the intermediate time span, I get, I sort of develop patience, if that makes any sense. There's that initial excitement for whatever it is, a vacation, a party. I mentioned that for a second, but it looks like we're back and live. So, all right. Anyway, so as I was saying, I think for me, I'm right down the middle in terms of patience versus impatience. That initial excitement for a party, a vacation, something, whatever it is, that initial excitement is something that kind of makes me a little impatient. After a while, the excitement kind of dies off. The recognizing that party, vacation, coming present, whatever it is down the line. I recognize that, I get used to it being down the line, and patience kind of develops. The impatience wears off. I then develop an ability to be patient, to wait for it to happen, and then kind of at that tail end, well, all right, it's only a week away that we get to go on vacation. It's only a week away that my parents are coming into town, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden I get giddy, I get excited, and with that excitement comes a little bit of impatience again. So the patience wears off. So I would say I'm a 5. Half the time I can be patient, but at that initial excitement, that initial end, I can be fairly impatient, and at that tail end, when it's really close, when I am so close to going on vacation, seeing my family again, whatever it is, that patience wears off. I start to become impatient. I start to get antsy, and I'm really excited because it's right here and so close. So I'll say I'm down the middle. It depends. I average out in the middle. So what about you all? When it comes to being patient versus impatient, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being very impatient, 10 being very patient. Let me know. Number 5. What do you tend to do when things start to look bad? Withdraw, pray, get help, cry, talk to a friend, or something else? When things start to look bad, definitely pray. Pray for patience, pray for guidance, pray for clarity of thought, so that as we, whatever it is, proceed through this murky time, there are no hasty decisions made. When things start to look bad, if it is something that I would need help with, I would get help. I would say, hey, I need help. What can you do this for me? What can you do to help? Generally, I don't cry. Um, if things start getting severe, not just bad, but severe, then we start getting into, possibility of me crying. But if it's just looking bad, looking not pleasant, then I don't really result to that. Definitely, I talk to friends, talk to family, talk to my wife, kind of get advice from them. So, but the guaranteed one for me is praying. You're just asking God, what do you want me to do in this situation? Help me to make it through. Help me to do your will in this situation, whatever it is. So, prayer is definitely my go-to. What about you all? When things start to get bad for you, what do you tend to do? Let me know in the comments below. Number 6. How do you tend to relate to the following authority figures? Okay, so there's a list. We'll go through them one by one. So first one is parents. I tend to relate to them very well. I get along with my parents very well. There was one point in life where I was kind of trying to come to terms with all the pain of my past, and unfortunately they got dredged into it a little bit, but we made it through that. I think the relationship has been reconciled above and beyond, and I relate to them very well. I talk to them weekly. I have talked to them weekly for as long as I can remember, whether that's in college and seminary, when I was doing my young adult volunteer year, or during my calls as a pastor. So that's the first one. The second one is school authorities. All right, as I mentioned at the start, I was a bit of a tyrant as a child, a young child. So I didn't really relate to school authorities very well. Once I got to middle school, high school, I definitely switched to the sides of the spectrum and became much more of a teacher's pet, much more of a brown-noser. So I started to relate to teachers, principals, assistant principals, school authorities much better. And that continued through college, seminary. All right, so the third one is government authorities. How do you relate to government authorities? I think this is a really sticky question because as a pastor, I'm not allowed to really divulge my political views, but definitely I'm very opinionated about how the government on various levels handles certain situations, namely the pandemic. So even if I don't agree with how they've handled it, I am I'm very comfortable with writing to senators, representatives, the president, the governor, to government officials and saying, okay, this is the situation that's going on. This is the concern I have. I hope that you can kind of see where I'm coming from and that you will take my opinion into account when another decision along these same lines comes up. I respect them. I in no way envy them, but that doesn't mean that I complacently agree with the way they handle situations either. So that's how I relate to government authorities. What about you all? Let me know. Another set of authority figures, there's 6 of them. We're on number 4 right now. Bosses and employers. So how do you relate to bosses and employers? Generally, I've related very well with previous bosses and employers. As my worksite supervisor during my year as a young adult volunteer will agree, I was very cocky at the beginning of my year there. I had just graduated from seminary. I had just gotten my first girlfriend, and I didn't know how long. I was in the city that I love. I was, everything was going my way. I was over and above giddy, and definitely that created a little bit of an issue at the beginning. That definitely tapered off at the end. Towards the end, my relationship with Chaplain Jane specifically, we went from me thinking, I don't know if I can last a year with her thinking, I don't know if I can last a year with him, to within a few months, us getting along very well. And by the end of the 11 months, I want to say it would have been June, so that would have been about month 9 out of 11. She went on a vacation to Italy for 2 weeks, and she said, hey Brad, you're in charge of the pastoral care department while I'm gone. Here's a key to my office, here's my beeper. You're in charge. I trust you to take care of it. So the fact that in 9 months we went from needing to have this little intervention with my site coordinator to, hey Brad, you're in charge, I trust you to do what's right. I think that's night and day. Outside of that sticky situation, I like to think that I've gotten along with my bosses, my employers, very well. I can't really think of bosses that I haven't really gotten along with. Anyway, next one is spiritual leaders. How have you gotten along with spiritual leaders? I get along with them very well. I mean, granted, I am one, so for me, that would be with the general presbyter, with the stated clerk of our presbytery. I like to think that I have a very good relationship with them. I mean, by no means are we calling each other up and, are we necessarily buddy-buddy, but also by no means do we hate each other, do we not get along. I got along very well with the authorities at the first presbytery that I was a member of. I get along very well with the general presbyter, stated clerk of Presbytery of Arkansas, where I am now. With the Committee on Preparation for Ministry for the 5 years that I was going through the ordination process, I got along very well with them. There were a couple sticky points where they would ask a question, I would ask for clarification, and they would just repeat the question. Or where they would say, oh, we didn't tell you had to do that? And I would say, no. So there was a little bit of miscommunication that definitely dampened the relationship, but after a while we kind of got used to it, and that improved. With pastors growing up, the only pastor I recall not getting along with was Reverend Carl Travis, who was head pastor of my home church, Grosse-Ile Presbyterian, from about 2000 through 2006, maybe. At the very beginning, I was in the 4th grade. He was new. I didn't like new. I didn't like change. I was as resistant to change as you can get. And so because he was new, because he was different, I did not like him. I just deemed him not good from the get-go. But through the death of my grandmother, he was the one who delivered the news to me. He was there. He was very intimately involved with the healing process for my family and I. And after that, we became very buddy-buddy. He is still, I would consider, a very good friend of mine. So, outside of that, those few sticky points, spiritual leaders have been I've gotten along very well with them. Last one is God. How do you relate to God? I like to think that I relate to God very well. I like to think that I can approach God at any given time. I can be very open and honest with him and not be this and not have to, go through a priest, a pastor. I can relate directly to God. God can relate directly to me. God can communicate directly to me. He doesn't have to send a message to a prophet then talk to me or something like that. Anyway. So again, how do you tend to relate to the following authority figures? Parents, school authorities, government authorities, bosses and employers, spiritual leaders, and God. It's a long list. Feel free to rewind the video if you need to hear them again. Number 7. When you make a mistake and sin, which of the following are you most likely to blame? Circumstances, bad timing, someone else, my sinful nature, my past, myself, God, or something else? All right. When I sin, I blame my sinful nature / myself. If I make a mistake, if I sin, that's on me. There is no, oh, well, it's your fault that I went to this nudie site. It's your fault that I, swore in church. It's your fault. No, I don't do that. I don't blame others for my mistakes. I am I'm a strong proponent of being very open and honest about basically owning up to my mistakes. My mistakes are mine to seek forgiveness for. Trying to spread the blame around is not helpful. It only further damages the situation, damages the relationship. It only adds fuel to the fire. It does not extinguish it. So, definitely my sinful nature and myself. There is a sinful nature within me which causes me to have temptation, which causes all of us to have temptation to sin, all of that. And in the end, it is our fault. We need to own up to our mistakes. We need to own up to our being powerless to resist the power of sin sometimes, and also own up to our letting ourselves give in. We know we shouldn't do or say something, but we do or say it anyway. We have the ability not to do it. It's not like we did it under duress, but we do it anyway. We make that conscious decision. You know what? I'll let this one sin happen. No, we need to own up to it. It's our fault as well. That's my response. What about you all? When you make a mistake, when you sin, Who are you most likely to blame? Let me know in the comments below. Number 8, what have you found helpful in waiting for God? Prayer, focusing on God's promises versus my circumstances, remembering how God has helped me in the past. By faith, resist the urge to make something happen, something else. For me, it's a number of them. First and foremost, prayer. Prayer is kind of the, for lack of a better analogy, is sort of the Band-Aid. It makes me feel good for the time being. It kind of calms my desire to make things happen myself. It helps me to, in the moment, be more patient. But in terms of a more long-term, aid in being helpful in waiting for God, the biggest ones are, the biggest one is remembering how God has helped me in the past. You know, there are certain events, certain times that I can't explain why they happen, but I mean, earlier this year, Katie and I were in a little bit of a sticky situation. Financially, nothing over the top, nothing that we couldn't have managed, but you know, our bank accounts would have taken a larger hit than usual. What do you know, that same day we found an envelope in our mailbox that just said Brad and Katie, didn't have a return address, anything like that, and there was $100 cash in it. And I was like, okay, that's unexpected. And along similar lines, you know, Katie and I are talking about our financial futures. We're talking about, okay, we need to draw up last will and testaments. We need to get Katie life insurance. Katie wants to go back to school. I want to go back to school. We want to adopt kids down the line. How are we going to make all of these things happen? And sure enough, within a week of our starting to really talk about that, of having that conversation, we get a check in the mail from the bank that we have our mortgage through saying they overcharged us on our escrow. You know, here's a check for $900. Like, oh. You know, some might consider that coincidence, but Katie and I don't really believe in coincidences. Here are two situations where, okay, we were talking about money, we have financial situations, and poof, money just magically shows up to us. Okay then. I mean, definitely there are situations that I can recall where God has helped us. We have been in a time of need. We have prayed, God help us. We can't do this without you, and poof, we're helped. So that definitely has been sort of the more longer term treatment, not just, you know, a Band-Aid for the time being, but the more permanent, the longer term, you know, help in being patient, in waiting for God to help in those times of need. So those are the two that I really focus around. What about you all? What have you found helpful in being patient and waiting for God in your times of need? Let me know in the comments below. Last but not least, our final question is, how can this group pray for you? As always, if you have prayer requests, please feel free to shoot me an email, shoot me a text, give me a phone call, or just leave it in the comments section down below. So, anyway, that's all I have for you all today. Until tomorrow, stay well, stay safe. God bless.